We've recently talked about quiet quitting and all its benefits, but have you heard about quiet firing? Have you ever considered that your boss may be quietly firing you? Today we're talking about what it is, what it looks like, and what to do if it's happening to you. There's no denying it. Work is one of the most important aspects of our happiness. It's what we do with most of our time, and it's what allows us to do whatever else we love doing when we're not working. I would say it is practically impossible to be happy or peaceful if your work sucks. If you work too much, if your work environment is toxic, or even if you don't make enough money with the work you do to afford all your basic necessities. Do you agree? And I'm guessing that's what bosses are counting on when they decide to quietly fire you. I would also say that most of us have been quietly fired at one time or another. I know I was. Now, this was actually the last marketing job I had, and being quietly fired was so traumatic that I decided I would never work in marketing again, even though I realize now, all these years later, that the issue wasn't marketing at all. It was how I was treated in that specific place. Now, this was a small but ambitious tech company. Aren't they all? And I didn't have a lot of experience, so when I was hired to be in charge of their marketing, I was really surprised. But then I realized they wanted young and inexperienced so they could pay badly, so I got it. And for me, it was a great experience and a challenge, so I had nothing to lose really. Or so I thought. Now at first, things were great. Every day I did something new. I was building their whole marketing from the ground up, so the learning curve was huge. And I was excited, and they seemed to be excited too. And then all of a sudden, things changed. And to this day, I have no idea why. Maybe I didn't meet their expectations. Maybe there was something I said or something I did. All of a sudden, all my projects were stalling and no one was discussing them with me. I stopped being a part of important meetings. I was being asked to work later and later. And then there was this one time when a partner finally called me for a virtual meeting. Now he was in the US and I was in Portugal, so this meeting was scheduled for 8 p.m. Lisbon time, way after my working hours were done. But because we used this specific software for virtual meetings, I had to stick around at the office to do it. 8 p.m. came and 8 p.m. went, and he never showed up. Now the next day, he told me he just forgot all about it and went on like nothing happened. And a week later, I resigned. In a nutshell, quiet firing is when a manager or a boss takes negative action, or should I say passive-aggressive action, towards an employee to make them quit. They'll withhold feedback or praise from you. They will cut your raises and promotions while others get so much more. They'll assign you tasks that require less experience or deliberately block any development or leadership opportunities. They cancel or reschedule their one-on-one meetings with you. They keep all the updated information you need to do your job from you. And of course, they never talk about any kind of future for you within the company. Often while making it clear that this is all, in fact, your fault. In more extreme cases, they'll flat out criticize you, isolate you, get your coworkers to join in for fear of being next on the list. They'll call you out on meetings for the smallest things, and the more people watching them do it, the better. And you will feel lonely and worthless and picked on and depressed and even burned out. You realize things will never change, so you may as well quit instead of putting up with it and eventually being fired. Make no mistake, quiet firing is nothing but a fancy term for bullying, harassment, and discrimination in the workplace. So why do they do this? When it's so much more respectful and professional to just fire someone who doesn't fit your team or who's better off elsewhere. Why do they risk a complaint or a lawsuit just to make sure you quit instead of firing you? Well, a couple of reasons actually. They can be very bad managers who are too incompetent to do their jobs properly. They just don't want a confrontation of having to fire someone, so they resort to this sort of tactic instead. Kind of like the person who wants to break up with you but isn't brave enough, so they'll just make your life miserable so you'll break up with them. Kind of like that. They may also believe it's just easier on the company morale to have someone quit instead of them being the bad guys that fire you, regardless of how toxic they make the working environment by bullying you. In their minds, it makes sense. Then, of course, you have the practical reason. Having an employee quit instead of firing them means no layoff payment and no severance package. In many countries, it is extremely hard to fire someone. The costs and the responsibility alone for doing it is almost worth it keeping the employee regardless of how bad their performance is. Almost. Also, remember when I said in this video how Amazon wasn't joining the layoff bandwagon because their workers quit so much they didn't have to? Odds are they are being quietly fired too. That way, The layoff statistics remain clear with no outraging layoff headlines, regardless of how bad the turnoff numbers are. Here's what's happening right now. After a blazing hot economy and job market in 2021 with the Great Resignation, and out-of-control inflation, recessionary worries, armed conflicts in Eastern Europe, supply chain disruptions, higher interest rates, and so on, bosses everywhere are starting to worry. In fact, we are now hearing about job cuts and hiring freezes and job offer rescissions every day. Managers are being told to pick who will stay and who will go when things take a turn for the worse and companies need to cut costs. And the new workers, the ones who landed high-paying, better benefit jobs, may very well be the first ones to go, regardless of how good they are. In fact, this has recently happened to one of my best friends. During the Great Resignation, she traded up to a job that ticked all of her boxes and she was ecstatic. But as soon as the first news hit about a possible recession, things started to change for her. Her manager became completely unavailable and her coworkers had no problem freezing her out. She was the new girl who had been hired, earning so much more money than them. Now, she did realize what was happening, but decided to stay on because this opportunity was just too good to give up on, right? And maybe if she talked things out with HR and her manager, things would change. They didn't. HR was fully aware of what was going on, and her manager had her orders, that were to make sure the new hires would move on as soon as possible. They reassured her that nothing was going on, but the behavior did not change. And that's when the surveilling started. Or maybe it started sooner, but she hadn't noticed it yet. Everything she did was looked at with a magnifying glass. Her manager documented everything to the smallest little detail and micromanaged everything she did. Her coworkers and even the clients she dealt with were being interviewed to look for any little mistakes. Eventually, a paper trail of reasons why her performance wasn't up to standards was created, and that led to her being fired. She ended up unemployed, burned out, and humiliated. She has since found a new job and is recovering from this experience, but I don't think she'll ever be as trusting as she was ever again. I know I wasn't. Let me tell you, in the end, the best thing you can do for yourself is to play their game and quit, because nothing will ever be as important as your mental health and your sense of worth. Much like for any relationship, you need to put yourself first and walk away from anything that isn't good for you, regardless of how convenient that is for the other party. It really doesn't matter. Move on, protect yourself, but do not sign any non-disclosure agreements that will prevent you from talking about your experience unless there's something in it for you, because nothing stops you from documenting their behavior and filing a complaint against them. But just make sure to move on, because better things await.